On tonight's show, we are incredibly honored to have on the legendary Bill James. It is hard to imagine baseball analytics in 2021 without the incredible work of the father of Sabermetrics. Bill joins us today to talk about a number of topics, from his runs created formula to similarity scores to closer committees in baseball and beating the shift. And later in the show, we'll have our trade deadline waiver wire pickups and a look at some new closer situations around baseball. Bill James is next on Beat the Shift. Welcome to another episode of the Beat the Shift podcast. I am your host, Ariel Cohen, and with me as always, Ruvain Guy. How are you, Ruvain?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic, and we have a very, very special guest on today's show. This is Bill James that we have on here, and Bill James is the father of Sabermetrics. Some statistics that are attributed to Bill: runs created, game score, the Pythagorean winning percentage, and many more. Bill worked for the Red Sox for more than a decade and a half, and he's featured in the famous book Moneyball by Michael Lewis. I've only named just a couple of some interesting things about Bill, but unbelievable. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Welcome, Bill James.
Thank you for having me on, and we are not going to tell anybody how much trouble it was to make my equipment work here.
We did it. It only took a few minutes, but we're glad to have you on and rolling. And, before we get started with the show, why don't you just tell us a little bit about your personal history? How did you get started writing all the baseball abstracts, and how did you get into the real business of baseball?
I started the baseball abstract with very low expectations, both for the book and for myself. I graduated from college in 71, was drafted, got out of the Army in 73. And I would have liked to write books, which worked out well, actually. But assuming that I wasn't going to be able to make a living as a writer, I would have liked to just be a local sports writer. I would have liked to write for my local paper or somebody else's local paper. However, being who I was at that time, I felt that I would never get that job. I felt, and I had real issues at that time that would have made it difficult for anyone to hire me. I didn't dress well. I didn't have any background in journalism. I tended to insult people 10 or 15 times an hour. It would have been hard for me to find that dream job as a sports writer for some small town somewhere. So I decided the only way I could do this was to do it myself. So I started writing the kind of articles that interested me and putting them together in a little book. And it took off beyond my expectations or anyone else's expectations.
Well, again, thank you for coming on. I know you probably have a very busy schedule and everything. Now, you are considered one of the forefathers or the forefather of Sabermetrics. How has Sabermetrics changed in the last 5 to 10 years, would you say?
I'm not sure I can answer how it's changed in the last 5 to 10 years. Over time, Sabermetrics has become something a long way from what it was in the 1970s when Pete Palmer and Dick Kramer and Dallas Adams and myself were basically the only people doing it. What we were doing was trying to find a way to put all of the little stuff together and answer the bigger questions. In other words, we were trying to study questions like, why do teams win? Who is better than who? Who really belongs in the Hall of Fame? Who's a better first baseman, Freddie Freeman or Jose Abreu? This was the 1970s, and Freddie Freeman and Jose Abreu probably weren't born yet, but you get my point. That was what we studied, and that was what we called Sabermetrics. What has come to be called Sabermetrics is mostly the invention of new systems of collecting data. We measure very small increments of the game. We measure how hard a ball is hit. we measure the launch angle, we measure the exact velocity and the exact break on a pitch, and those things are called sabermetrics. But that kind of thing, honestly, doesn't have very much to do with the stuff that we were doing when the field broke through in the early 1980s.
So actually, when it broke through in the 1980s, you created a lot of these terms for these new metrics. Which one are you most proud of creating, and why?
And I don't know what the answer is, honestly. I suppose runs created because it answers such a basic question about the game. But the thing I always try to take credit for and never get credit for is I claim to have invented Bring Your Dog to the Park Day. And I was doing a radio show, not very different from this, in Milwaukee, toward the end of the season, and must have been '83 or '84. And it was just a dreadfully boring show. So I decided to say something stupid just to see what would happen. And so I started talking about some game that I claimed had happened, and it never actually happened. It was, and I claimed it was Bring Your Dog to the Park Day, which I figured was just a stupid idea because dog doesn't get anything out of being at the park anyway, and you'd have dog fights and dog doo-doo and people and dogs barking, and you couldn't concentrate on the game. So that was in Milwaukee, and sure enough, the next year the Brewers actually did it. So I claim credit for that. And it actually worked. I mean, I never thought it would work, but it did. So that's the one I'm going to claim.
out of all the metrics, you're claiming as your favorite the bring the dog to the park. That's fantastic. But you know what? You mentioned runs created, and I have to tell you something about it with me. And runs created. One of the shorthands, the most simplest form is OBP times total bases. Right. That's the very basic, simple form
Right.
without taking stolen bases and caught stealing and everything to account. I play in a softball league. And it's not a major league level. There are plenty of errors that go around. And when I compared our team's runs versus the theoretical runs created formula, there was always some discrepancy. We would always score more runs. And that led to me to
Right.
think there's got to be some way to modify that formula to work for this league. And so I found out that if I added a reached on an error as a half a total base, like a single is one and a double is two, a reach on error is a half a total base. That was the additional ballast that got all the runs scored for my team to be very, very close year after year to the formula-driven runs created that you would have created. So I thought that was
Wow.
interesting to share with you.
Well, it's fascinating. I never thought of that. I've done all kinds of complicated dances to try to make the system work in 1905 and 1955 and 2005 and still work today. But I never thought to include ROE, reached on error, as an element, probably because the data would not have been widely available until maybe 2000. Well, going back 100 years, it wouldn't be widely available until the last 5 years. So that's a wonderful idea. And I'll, if you don't mind, I should point out that Dick Kramer actually used the formula you just mentioned before I did. He didn't call it runs created, but he used the same formula. But I'll try that and see if it works in the majors. If it solves some of my problems in the majors.
Well, I would be immensely honored if you would definitely see what kind of factor times reached on error would actually help and give a formula more meaning. That would be a great honor if you would run with that. Thank you for that.
Well, thank you for the suggestion. I'll give it a look.
Sure. Absolutely, yeah. That's just something that you had an influence on me, and I thought of that, and I did my calculations, and there you go. But back to real life baseball. I said that you were featured in the book Moneyball, and the OBP was featured there, and Billy Bean stumbled on the fact that ball clubs were undervaluing on base percentage. Is there a stat that you think in today's game, the ball clubs are undervaluing? Like, is there a new OBP in the sense of something that maybe teams should pay attention to more that would give them an edge?
I don't know that I can answer your question in the exact form that you ask it, Ariel. However, I would say this. There is still an immense amount of received wisdom / BS that controls how decisions are made in baseball. And I mean, we have carved away at it, and we have eliminated 20% of it or 30% of it. But there's still an immense amount of, listen to any baseball broadcast, and the announcer will say some things which have long since been established as nonsense, and will also say a long series of things that are speculative and questionable. So I don't know that I can give you one thing, but I do think that there's something there, yes. And I do think that there are still a lot of things that could be lifted from our understanding of the game and could be very useful to teams.
Right. Question on defensive metrics. And, offensive metrics are a little bit more easier to see in terms of usefulness. What, in your opinion, is the best defensive metric to use? UZR, DRS, fielding percentage? What do you find is the most helpful and accurate?
I do not know how accurate any of them are. I can't really tell you that. What I use is, run, save, plus, minus. I mean, that's what I refer to most often because it's conceptually simple. I don't have immense confidence that it's accurate. Whatever I learn from a defensive metric, I want to see it confirmed by watching the player or by the opinion of a scout that I value, or by another 2 or 3 other defensive metrics. When there is a convergence of different ways of measuring something around a single conclusion, then I have a lot of confidence that that conclusion is right. But when it's one method on its own, no matter what it is, I never have a lot of confidence that it's correct.
Well, actually, one of the teams that have the best defensive run save this year are the Tampa Bay Rays, and it shows because they have a great defense, have a very athletic team in general. And another thing that they've actually put into use is the use of closer by committee. Now, you actually started talking about this with the Red Sox. They never actually implemented it, but how did you come up with that philosophy, and how soon until we see the rest of baseball move to that strategy, do you think?
Well, to be clear, I never actually advocated that with the Red Sox. The people wrote that I did, but I never really did. But closer by committee is a rejection of conventional wisdom. And since I reject conventional wisdom on a pretty regular basis, it is something that people would naturally associate with me. You have to remember, and a younger fan may not be able to relate to this, but there was a period, roughly 1985 to 2005, when the belief in the closer, the efficacy of the closer was at a very, very high level. And every team had to have a closer. And people would say, although it was never true, people would say on television constantly that, you're going to win in the postseason, you got to have a great closer. Or you're going to win in the close games, you got to have a great closer. And this belief was pitched at such a level that it was almost impossible to argue with. Anyone who argued with it tended to be branded a heretic. I've been a heretic a long time. I like that. So I kind of sort of willingly embraced that position, although never actually I never actually advocated a closer by committee, but I did make fun of the idea that you had to have a great closer, a single identifiable great closer, in order to succeed in baseball, because you clearly didn't. Any year you name, there are teams that were very successful with either a mediocre closer or just a bunch of guys showing up, whoever shows up today. So yes, I think that the belief in the value of a great closer is breaking up, and I believe it will continue to break up over time. I mean, if you have somebody who's great in that role and you have a bullpen that can support him, that's wonderful. But I don't think that I never thought that it's something you have to have in order to succeed.
And as a follow-up to that, another thing the Rays did was actually under Joe Madden, is they started implementing the infield shift. What's your feeling about that infield shift? Do you think it should be disallowed? I mean, shouldn't players be allowed to play wherever they want to on the field?
Right. No, I don't see any sensible argument for disallowing it. Well, the argument for disallowing it, and this gets back to things that people believe that aren't true. The argument for disallowing it is that it's changed the game and it's driving batting averages down. Well, obviously, it does drive batting averages down a little bit, but its impact on the overall game is minimal. You know, it's just the hits go up the middle, or hits go to a slightly different position, whereas they don't go up the middle anymore as they did. But the in-play batting average now is higher than it was 20 years ago. And if the shift was doing what people think it was doing, that couldn't possibly be true. No, I don't see any legitimate argument for banning the shift, or, I mean, I don't see how. Baseball, as much as I love baseball, and I honestly I enjoy baseball now more than I ever have, and baseball has consumed a vast chunk of my life. But it does have aesthetic problems, right? There are a lot of things that you kind of need to do to make the game move at a quicker pace. Banning the shift isn't one of those. It's not going to do anything.
Right. And I mean, call me very overly simplistic, but isn't a solution for a team to teach some very simplistic bunting? And if a team bunted down the third base line with their lefties once out of every 4 times, wouldn't that almost stop the shift? Is that too silly for me to even suggest?
Well, no, it's not too silly to suggest, but I have no independent way of knowing that it's true or that it's false. When I started writing about this subject in the 1970s, my assumption was, well, I don't have any experience in baseball. I don't have any credentials to be an authority. So everything I claim is true, I have to be able to prove is true with reference to objective facts. I mean, that assumption, that point of view is what created sabermetrics. I mean, the difference between sports writing and sabermetrics is that in sports writing, you can say what you think is true, but in sabermetrics, you have to be able to show that it's true. And I don't have any independent way of showing that that's true. I mean, you can definitely show that it's true that if people could bunt once in a while,
right,
it would end the shift, right? You can definitely show that part of it's true. But whether players could learn to bunt at the major league level with reasonable effort and success, I do not know.
Right. Well, there you go. You're a baseball scientist, and you follow the scientific method. Just a question. You have your similarity scores. Could you just explain to the audience here, how do you compare different ball players, especially across different baseball eras?
The adaptation of similarity scores has greatly disappointed me over the years. If I can mention your rival's site, Baseball References publishes similarity scores, but it isn't at all what I was trying to do. When I use similarity scores, I use them all the time in my own research. I will use them in a project that I'm working on at this moment. When I use them, I create a similarity score that is appropriate to the purpose that I'm studying, right? It's not just a matter of looking for somebody who has about the same set of numbers. It's looking for somebody who is similar in the ways that are relevant to this particular question. People have never gotten that idea. And Baseball Reference, by publishing similarity scores, which are sort of disembodied, and I like Sean Foreman, and I've always meant to try to talk to him about this issue, and try to get him to adapt what he's doing. For example, in many studies that you're doing, including the one I'm doing right now, a player's age is extremely relevant, right? But if you're just looking at guys who had years like this, it doesn't matter whether he's 21 or 32. And I think so. That line of research is kind of blocked. It's just sitting where it was when I introduced it in 1982. Would you like me to back off and try to answer more directly your question? Your question was, how do you do that? Well, you place values on things. If one player hits 40 homers and another player hits 39, that's a high degree of similarity there, right? And so the player who hits 39 homers is much more similar than the player who hits 10 homers. And the player who drives in 120 runs is much more similar to the guy who drives in 100 than to the guy who drives in 40. And you can, in this way, which is, it's an intuitive idea, right? But for any study in which you're trying to project what will happen next, or whether you're testing whether there's a real effect there or not, you really have to include age. And sometimes you have to include late season performance or early season performance. Sometimes speed is very, very important. Sometimes it's not relevant at all. Sometimes you can compare a third baseman and a first baseman on a level field, and sometimes you can't. I mean, if you're just talking about them as hitters, it doesn't really make any difference whether these. Well, I shouldn't overstate it. If you're just talking to them, let's say you're discussing the impact of a player hitting an extra 20 home runs. Well, it doesn't matter whether he's a third baseman or first baseman; it's the same. But if you're talking about his overall value or most other questions you would discuss about it, then it makes a huge difference whether it's third baseman or first baseman. So then you place a value on that difference, which is relevant to the study that you're trying to conduct.
Right. And you did this recently in an article where you compared the greatest players of all time by showing the greatest teams of the decade, and you had your all 2010 team and your all 1990s team, and I'm assuming that you used some scores. But before we go on, we have this week's Injury Gurus Trivia of the Week.
Now, actually, instead of the trivia this week, we're going to play a little game called Guess Their Average. The game is going to be between Bill James and Ariel. I am going to list 5 players who are on this in the article that Bill James wrote about the greatest players of all time in each decade, and you will try to guess their batting average, and whoever gets closest will get 1 point. Whoever gets to 3 points first wins. Is that okay?
It's me versus Bill here?
Yes.
All right.
Okay. First of all, the first play. Okay. Well,
no cheating.
No cheating. No cheating. The first player we're going to start with is one of the hottest hitters in the majors right now. He's homered in 6 straight games, which is a new Reds record. What is the career average for Joey Votto?
Do I go first or does Bill?
You go first.
All right. I'm going to go for. I'll say 302.
I'm going to say 293.
The answer is 303 currently.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
303. So, Ariel, you get that point.
Oh, wow.
The next player I'm going to list has a career 675 home runs to date. I'm talking about Albert Pujols. Everyone knows he's a home run hitter, but what is his career batting average to date? Bill, you can go first.
Over the last 10 years, it's 206, but then there was some good years before that. No, I know it's not 206, but let's say he probably hit 320, 325 the first 10 years, and it's probably hit 260 the last. So let's guess 288.
All right, I'm gonna take the over on that, so I'll go 295.
Wow. 297 is
Are you
his
serious? Wow.
current career
Wow.
average. Okay. Now this one is hopefully this will be in Bill James's wheelhouse. It's the player's a little bit older.
Pressure's on.
It's yeah, it's someone who I think is one of the top 5 greatest pure hitters of all time, and I've actually seen him play, and he was amazing. You can never get him out, and that's Tony Gwynn. What was Tony Gwynn's career batting average?
I'm going to guess 322.
Ariel?
I'm gonna go over that. I'm gonna go. I'll go 330.
338.
Wow. Oh
The
wow.
answer
Wow.
is 338. Can
That's
you imagine
incredible.
a batter this day and age batting a career 338? That's crazy.
Oh, wow.
The career exit velocity of averaging about 65 miles an hour. He just
Wow.
slapped the ball and rolled it. That's all.
It doesn't matter if you hit it 2 feet and you get on first base. You hit it 200 feet and get on first base. It still counts as a hit. So, the next player I'm going to mention, even though Ariel, you already got the 3 points,
Oh, wow.
is the captain. He's going to Cooperstown this year, and I'm talking about Derek Jeter. What is Derek Jeter's career batting average? Ariel, go first.
Jeter, 315.
I'll go 310.
Ding, ding, ding. 310. We have a winner there. Derek Jeter's
Exactly?
career batting average
Wow.
is exactly 310. And now, in honor of the trade deadline, Nelson Cruz, who was recently traded, what's his career batting average?
284.
I'll say 275.
Right in the middle, 278. The answer is
Ah.
278.
Oh, wow.
So he actually hit for average pretty well for a while, and then he's not one of those Joey Gallo types who hits 230, 220 and hits all those home runs. He's actually a pretty good all-around hitter. So, Bill, who, in your opinion, is the greatest hitter of all time, and who is the greatest pitcher of all time?
Greatest hitter, I'm going to stick with Babe Ruth. Greatest pitcher, and maybe unpopular, but I go with Roger Clemens. I think Clemens has more great years relative to his time than anybody else.
It's hard to argue with that. Yeah.
And how do you think Babe Ruth would stack up against today's players? Do you think he would have had the same type of career, or do you think he would not be able to catch up to the fastballs of today?
I was just thinking about this issue in this way. 30 years ago, it was common for the common belief on that related to that issue 30 years ago. No, I shouldn't say the common belief. For 100 years, old baseball players immediately on retiring would start telling the press how much greater they were in their day than the modern players. And Rob Nair and I got really interested in that, and we found record of like 100 players doing that from literally from the 1890s until the time that we stopped. And we used to publish, and we published in several different books these quotes from retired players. Ernie Lombardi in 1948 saying, none of these guys could hit Carl Hubble. The since I don't know that anybody truly believed that there was a constantly descending quality of Major League play, but there was a general perception that the quality of play was not going up. Now the worm is completely turned on that, and almost all sports fans now tend to imagine that there's been this tremendous improvement in the quality of play over time. And I don't buy that any more than I did the other. I don't see any evidence. I don't see any evidence that there's a radical improvement in quality of play over the last 30 years. I don't see any reason at all to believe that. And if we have now these relievers who play 100 who pitch 30 innings a year and throw 102 miles an hour, right? But if they're if they're better than the players of 50 years ago, why can't they do what Sandy Koufax did? Why can't they do what Bob Gibson did? Um, and every claim for improvement in the game over time comes down to an issue like that. The players of today do something that the players of 30 years ago didn't do and couldn't do, but also the players of 30 years ago did things that players today don't do. So I'm not convinced that I'm not convinced that any 2021 team. I'm convinced that they would totally dominate a team from 1921. I'm convinced they would probably beat a team from 1971, but I don't see it as being a one-sided competition.
The only thing I'll throw into that equation is that there has been expansion in baseball. Right? The number of teams has increased, and just because, if you have the best talent spread on 32 teams versus 25 teams, for example, you're going to have a little bit of a watering down, right? The average hitter will be worse. The average pitcher would be worse. So how would that factor into comparing different eras of baseball?
Well, that's a really good question, and it depends on where you come down on this issue. And that is, are major league players because of innate athleticism, or because combined with their natural athleticism, they've learned how to play the game at that level? And I mostly believe that they are at that level because they have learned how to play at that level. I think there are actually a substantial number of people who have the athletic ability, the reflexes, the innate ability to play at that level, but whose careers ended somewhere because they ran out of chances. And because I believe that, and this is what I have done studies about that, which are hard to explain and hard to justify, but they tend to suggest that the effects of the first expansion in 1961-62 actually played out within a few years. They probably played out by 1968. However, the effects of the second expansion in 1969, when baseball baseball in a decade, in a period of 10 years, went from 16 teams to 24, right? And that's a big expansion. And because of that, the effects of the second expansion were much bigger and took much longer. It took much longer for baseball to get back to the level where it had been post-expansion. At least that's my belief.
Right. Let's move on to a couple of mailbag questions that our listeners gave in. Let's start with Pat's question, and he's asking, do you have any rule changes that you think would improve the game of baseball?
There are a lot of things. There are a lot of things you could do that wouldn't ruin the game. Those wouldn't be favored by the commissioner. No, just kidding. I'm actually starting to soften on the designated runner in the 10th inning. I thought I hated it at first, and I'm starting to accept it. The 7 inning doubleheaders, I'm never going to get there. I think there are rules that definitely need to be there that aren't there. For example, no pitcher should be allowed to stand on the mound and throw repeatedly to first base. It's a waste of everybody's time, and it doesn't make any sense to say that the pitcher is only allowed to make three bad throws to home to the batter, and then on the fourth one he loses the contest and the batter goes to first. But if he wants to stand on the mound and make 11 bad throws to first base, well, that's fine. It's not fine. It doesn't make any sense. So that's one. I would. I'm not really in favor of clocks, But for example, what we can call the Gary Sanchez rule, the rule that limits how often a catcher can trundle out to the mound and count his fingers. That's been a very good rule, and it's just been 4 or 5 years, and everybody accepts it universally, right? It's kind of hard to imagine baseball being played without it anymore. But there has to be some sort of limit on batters being granted timeout when the pitcher is ready to pitch. That's the biggest thing that could be done that would easily make the game move at a more realistic pace.
Right, interesting suggestions here. Question from Scotty. He asks, how is your pitcher's game score statistic holding up? Would you have any revisions if creating in a statistic in today's bullpen heavy environment? What would you change?
Several people have suggested different ways of doing it, right? So I'll leave the amendments up to them. It's held up remarkably well over time. I mean, the average is 50 pretty much. In the 1960s, actually goes up to 52 or something. And it's around 50 in the steroid era. It actually goes down to 48 and a half or something. But the average, it held up remarkably well over time. And I'm comfortable with it. And, I mean, everything I've done, somebody else has come up with a better way to do it, or what they claim is a better way to do it. And I'm not going to argue with them. If you have a better way to do it, well, sure. But I'm also not going to revise my own method.
Yeah, but I'll add to that. What I like about your work is it's simple concepts and simple things. And sure,
Right.
There's a better formula where you add 0.2 of this and you factor in this, and that gets you a little bit more exact. But that's not what baseball statistics is about. It's about the simplicity. I mean, going back to the runs created, OBP times total bases. That's such a simple way to put things, and it gets you 85% of the way there. I like the simplicity in what you do.
That's exactly right, Ariel. I do strongly prefer simple ideas to complicated ones, and I argue that that's one of the biggest barriers to sabermetrics becoming more easily accepted by the guys who call into talk shows. Is you have to keep, if you want people to understand what you're saying, you have to keep your ideas on a level that the human mind can retain them and possess them.
Yeah, no, exactly. A little bit about you in terms of what you're doing what are you doing right now, and what do you hope to accomplish in baseball personally during the next 5 years, let's say?
What I did today, we had a 2-hour meeting about the handbook planning meeting. We published the Bill James Baseball Handbook. I've published it every year since late 1980s, and so you have it now takes as long to have a meeting to plan it as it did to write the book and create the book in the origin. That's an overstatement, but everything gets more complicated over time. The study I'm working on, I'll tell you this: people say that when a pitcher has to make several starts in the postseason, has to pitch an extra 20 innings, that has a carryover effect for the next year. I promise you, in the World Series, somebody will say that on the air. But I don't know whether it's true or not. So I'm in the middle of a study in which I will, try to identify the hardest working postseason pitchers of the last 25 years. B, by similarity scores, match each one of those with a very similar pitcher who didn't pitch in the postseason. And C, try to see whether there's any carryover effect that you can observe. The guys who work hard in the postseason, if they have any more tendency to break down the next year.
No, that's great stuff. And I look forward to reading and diving into that research. So thanks for that. Once again, thank you so much, Bill, for coming on. You can follow Bill on Twitter at Bill James Online, and of course you can take a look at his website, BillJames.com, I believe. And anything else you want to tell the listeners what's going on? Anything you want to plug?
No, I don't think I have anything else to plug. I do appreciate you having me on, and I'd be happy to talk to you anytime.
Thank you. The honor is really ours.
So much.
Yeah, no, thank you. All right, well, we'll be back here in just a short moment with our waiver wire and pitcher previews and injuries from Ruvain. Once again, thank you so much, Bill James. We'll see you in just a bit. All right, we're back here on the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. Very honored to have on the legendary, the great Bill James on the show talking about. I can't believe that. Well, first of all, I can't believe that I beat Bill James in a baseball contest. That was pretty cool, Ruvain.
Yeah, and I can't believe you brought up the fact about your softball with him. Also, I can't believe that either. So
It's funny, but we asking the question about his favorite statistic, and like that's the one that I used from him, and that I worked hard on altering. And I like to talk about my softball league, and I don't know, it just fit. And lo and behold, he said that that was interesting to him. So I'm very impressed there. All right, on to our waiver wire segment. Could be an interesting one. You got all the trade deadline. This show is being recorded on a Thursday night. The trade deadline is Friday, so there might be other people to pick up because of that in between. But we'll do our best for the knowledge we have. Ruvain, why don't you start first? Who's a couple of waiver wire guys to pick up?
All right, the first guy I'm going to mention is Brian Anderson from the Marlins. He's only 36% owned in CBS. Garrett Cooper's out for the year. Brian Anderson can play almost everywhere. He's played first in the past. He can play third. He can play the outfield. He's only eligible at third this year. But so far for this year, he's batting .264, 5 homers, 15 RBIs, and 4 stolen bases. Now, over the past couple of last week or so, he's hitting over .350. So he's a guy, if he's still available in any of your leagues, he is going to be eligible at third base right now. He may get eligibility later in the outfield, but we'll see about that. And another guy I wanted to mention who I, was thinking about not mentioning because of the trade that the Mariners just made to get Diego Castillo was Drew Steckenrider from the Mariners. Drew Steckenrider would have been the next guy up if Paul Sewell would have failed as Mariners closer. Now, even though he's not going to be the closer, and even though Drew Steckenrider is going to be one of the setup men again, he has been very, very good this year. And if you want someone to stabilize your ERA and WHIP, he's the guy to go to. In 39 innings, he got 41 strikeouts, 3 saves, a 2.08 ERA, a .97 WHIP, and he's only 4% owned in CBS. Now, if you can't stomach any of the 2-star pitchers that you have, he's a guy that if you can get for free, nobody's going to want him, and you can plug him in there, and he can help with your ratios for a week or two.
All right, so I'm going to mention 2 batters, and then I think we really do have to talk about closers, so we'll do that separately. But first, let's start with Rowdy Tellez, only 10% owned on CBS, 10 for his last 24, 4 walks, 3 homers in that span. He's a guy who's heating up, trying to find success with a new team. They brought in some reinforcements with Eduardo Escobar being traded there. I think Rowdy Tellez is somebody that you might want to pick up, somebody who is, people were high on before the season started. I think the change of scenery could help. How about Rougned Odor on the Yankees? 17% owned on CBS, 3 homers in his last 2 weeks. He's batting .286 over that span. And now, look at that lineup. You got Joey Gallo, Anthony Rizzo traded there, Aaron Judge, Stanton. I mean, look at that power in the team. And Rougned Odor, under-owned player, somebody that if you need a second baseman, he can fill in the spot. Closers. I think we should really talk about this separately. Are there any, let's fill in between you and me, some closer situations that are now open that you might want to throw a dart on who the next closer is going to be in this window right after the trade deadline?
Well, I think you have to look at the teams that are trading away the closers. Now, one of the teams that traded away one of their closers was Tampa. They just traded Diego Castillo. Are you buying any of their closers right now who are just to pick up saves? I don't think you are. I think you're picking them up for the ratios, but you just have to still stay away and treat it the way you were treating it before.
Well, I mean, we talked about the Tampa Bay situation that, sure, there is no closer, but everyone is getting a share. And if you have a really good pitcher and a share, you're getting a third of the closer job. I like Andrew Kittredge in the bullpen. I first of all, he got a 1.43 ERA, .85 WHIP. He has been phenomenal this year. He has 6 wins, but now some save opportunities may open up. I can really see him getting a nice third of the share of saves. Again, you're not going to get more than that on the Rays, but that's just going to increase his value. And I have him on a couple of teams, even in some shallow leagues. I would really consider Andrew Kittredge. What about, look at poor Paul Sewell. 3 days ago, he had no value. And then they traded Graveman. Oh, all of a sudden, he's the closer. Bada bing, bada boom. And 2 seconds later, Diego Castillo, his value just plummeted. Crazy. Washington. They traded Brad Hand. Do you see it as Kyle Finnegan to pick up? Tanner Rainey? Are you staying away from the situation?
I don't know. I think Wander Suero has the best profile for it because he has a very dominating fastball. I think he's going to be the guy to go for. But I'd probably stay away from anyone there because they're not going to have that many save opportunities. I think. And listen, Brad Hand was traded to Toronto. Brad Hand has not been good recently. He's been giving up a lot of runs. I wouldn't go ahead and start dropping Romano just yet. I think if you have Jordan Romano, I think you hold on because remember Brad Hand's a lefty. They may split the saves going down the stretch. I don't think there's any reason to get rid of them.
How about the Marlins situation? They traded Garcia. Dylan Floro, Anthony Bender. I've actually picked up Anthony Bender in like 3 leagues. Do they go back to Anthony Bass, who we had on the show here, beat the shift? Anybody that you're buying?
I think Anthony Bass is the cheapest. He'll be available almost for free, and I think they may go back to him because he was the closer to start the season. They may try to establish him again at the end of this year, so going into next year he can be the closer. Anthony Bender they already used as an opener for a game, so I can't see him going back to closer. I mean, the Marlins, I think it was 2 years ago, they used Ryan Stanek as an opener for most of the season, and he even got some save opportunities. I don't see the same thing with Bender. I think they use him in high leverage situations, but I can see them going back to Anthony Bass.
All right, Cubs. They traded Ryan Tepera, so he's not going to be the guy. Rowan Wick, I'm assuming now's the time to pick up a lot of Rowan Wick.
Well, he's still on the IL. You don't know exactly when he's coming back. So I think if Kimbrel stays, obviously he's the closer. But if he goes, I think it may be Rex Brothers. He's closed before a little bit when he was with Colorado. It was him and what's his name? There's another guy in Colorado. There's always a committee in Colorado. So Rex Brothers does have the ability to close. So I think even though he's a lefty, I think they'd go with him.
Yeah, I think if you don't have problems with your lineup and you can spare a spot, Rowan Wick is going to be a cheap option to hold for a week or two more and see what you got. I would spend $1 on Rowan Wick. All right, what about the situation now? Pirates. This may be a moot point by now, but if you're in a if you somehow have David Bednar available and they trade Richard Rodriguez, he's the guy. We've been talking about him quite a bit. Twin situation. Who do you have here? Is Hansel Robles the guy to throw stuff? Tyler Duffy? Who's the guy for you?
I think it's going to be Hansel Robles unless he's traded, and I think Hansel Robles will probably be traded. The most logical guy to be traded was Taylor Rogers, but he just went on the injured list with a sprained finger, so he's probably not going to get traded. Although Danny Duffy, who is on the IL, was just traded earlier today to the Dodgers, so you never know what's going to happen. But I think Hansel Robles is a closer until he's gone from there. You still have Alex Colomé sitting there. He could hypothetically still close, so I wouldn't put all my money on Tyler Duffy, though.
All right, Texas. Assuming Ian Kennedy gets traded, you no longer have Joely Rodriguez. Who's the guy for you? Is it Spores in the bullpen?
It's Spores, but I think I'd stay away from that situation also because I think it'll be a little bit by committee because there's no real proven closer there.
All right. Any other situations to talk about changing hands from this?
I think we should also mention, I guess, Cincinnati. Cincinnati's still in the race. I mean, who do you have there? Do you have Amir Garrett, who's looked good sometimes, bad sometimes? Heath Hembry. They just got Michael Givens. They have Sean Doolittle now. Who do you think they go with?
Michael Givens, being that they traded for him, and they really don't have a guy. I think Givens is the guy to throw a dart on.
Okay, I tend to agree with that. And there's another situation that's going on in Arizona. Yes, they're the last place team. Yes, they're trading away everybody. But the last few games, Joaquin Soria has pitched the 8th inning, and Tyler Clippard has been getting the save opportunities. Do you spend on Tyler Clippard?
Goodness gracious. Wasn't Tyler Clippard on the Mets' 2015 postseason run?
Yes, he was, Joaquin Soria is I guess she's in the same age range.
Oh,
so
man.
I mean, either one of them. I mean, who do you have there?
I go with Soria, but I mean the Diamondbacks stink. So I'm probably staying away from that situation altogether. I'd rather bet on one of the other guys, even if it's less of a guarantee. I'd rather go with the Rowan Wick or the Anthony Bender rather than play in the Diamondback situation.
I agree, and I think both of them will probably get traded before the trade deadline. So,
yeah, it's possible. All right, let's do a pitcher preview. That's where we talk about either a good matchup for next week that you want the pitcher, a 2-start week, or now that it's almost August, unbelievable it's almost August, could be a future 2-start pitcher. That would mean a pitcher that is slated to be not to start this week, but to start the following week. And on the waiver wire, you can probably get him for free. Whereas next week, if people are struggling to get anybody they can with 2 starts, they would cost money. So free is better. If you can roster the guy and save him for a week, it's always better to do it first. Any pitcher preview? Any pitchers you want to mention?
Yeah, I got 2 of them, actually. I got Adrian Hauser, who's only 21% owned in CBS. He's got 2 start lined up right now, Pittsburgh and San Francisco. I like the Pittsburgh start a lot. He's only pitched a total of 13 innings in his last 3 outings, but he's got a 2.7 ERA, only 9 strikeouts and 8 walks. So I don't like those ratios too much, but he is playing for a first-place team, so there's a possibility that if they don't add to that rotation by the time this airs, I think he will get the shot, and I think he's a guy worth owning to try to get a win. Another guy to mention is Michael Wacha. Yes, the former Met. He's with Tampa right now. He is playing Seattle and at Baltimore. Those are pretty good matchups. His ERA in the last couple starts was 4.5, which is not that great, but he's got 16 strikeouts in 14 innings playing on a team that's doing very well, the Tampa Bay Rays. He's only 13% owned in CBS, so he's another guy to watch for.
Yeah, and being that they just traded Rich Hill to the Mets and they just traded Castillo out, I would assume that they would want starters to go that extra inning if possible, and that always helps, for fantasy. And Seattle, Baltimore, that's a fantastic. It doesn't get much better than that. So if you're ever going to roster Michael Wacha this year, it would be this coming week. Those 2 guys were on my list. I'll just throw 2 guys out. The list is really bad this week. I really don't see picking up pitchers here. I think I'd go for speculative closers this week instead. But Dane Dunning, I like his stuff. He's playing the Angels and Oakland this year, and Jordan Lyles playing the Angels and Oakland as well. Yeah, two guys you might pick. And here's another Texas guy, future 2-star pitcher, Colby Allard. He's been very good at times, not so good at other times, but 2 starts at Seattle and versus Oakland. Pick him up now. He'll be free, and just ride him while you can. All right.
Yeah, this is the time to get the 2-star pitchers, because if you do this too late, you're not going to get the stats you need, because September, a lot of times they start bringing up more people and they'll get less playing time. So you got to get them now when they're hot.
Yeah. And in terms of strategy, we don't really advocate going with the 2-star pitchers so early because you can get gombered by somebody. But when you get down to the nitty-gritty with the last 8 weeks of the season, you see we are in categories, and you see which means more. Is it wins? Is it strikeouts? Are they bunched up? Do they have a high gradient? Or do you see the ERA, is that bunched up? Because if you're not at a point where you can gain a lot in ERA, or if you actually have a great lead, you're much better off starting that 2-star pitcher, even if he's a crappy player, to get that maybe win or pick up a couple of strikeouts. So you really need, for any of these things, like we're telling you blanket advice, but it's very context dependent. You have to look at your league situation and always go for the categories that are required in a bunched up situation, the high gradient, the low gradient ones where either you have a lead or you're trailing by too much. Those you don't need those statistics as much, and trade from one to the other. Do you suggest to do that, Ruvain, on the batting side as well? Like if you have a big stolen base lead, or you're up by 12 stolen bases on the next guy, and you're bunched up in power, is it worth sitting, Raimiel Tapia for just some Randall Grichuk, somebody who's gonna hit power and not much else?
Well, I wouldn't use Raimiel Tapia as an example because he scores a lot of runs also.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't necessarily use him. But if you just, let's say you're going to use a player like Dylan Moore, who will either get on base a couple times, steal a couple bases, hit a home run now and then, but you mainly have him and you got him at the auction or draft for stolen bases. If you want to play him now, I think now's the time to do it, because this is also the time when people are looking in the waiver wire trying to find those stolen base guys. If you have the abundance of stolen bases, I wouldn't necessarily sit them. I'd even try to trade them for a need that you have on your team, because the trading deadline for a lot of leagues is going to be either this week or next week. And if you have that stolen base guy, look at the standings for stolen bases. Who needs the stolen bases? What do they have that you could use? Offer that trade. What have you got to lose if you have that 12 stolen base lead?
Yeah, fair point. And yeah, my example was not the greatest. I just thought about it very quickly. But yeah, the point is that hitting side, it works as well. And obviously, if you can go in the trade route, that always is well. Injury update, Ruvain. As we head into the trading deadline, what do you have for us?
Okay, first of all, we'll start with Jared Walsh. He was actually placed on the IL with a right intercostal strain. We don't know how bad it is just yet. The earliest he can be activated will be August 6th. Phil Gosselin, Matt Thaiss were called up. Those are guys who can fill in at first base for the Angels. Pete Fairbanks, another guy who was in that bullpen for Tampa, just was placed on the IL, so that opens up spots for other people to get saves. This is the second time he's on the IL with shoulder inflammation. That's not a good thing, so we'll see how that works out. Some updates. Francisco Lindor, the GM for the Mets, actually gave an update saying that he's going to be out for about another 4 to 5 weeks. So make sure you have a good replacement for him. You have Mike Trout. The rumor is, or they were saying that there's a possibility that when he comes back, which will be hopefully in the next week or two, if everything plays out properly, when he comes back, he may actually play a corner outfield spot or DH. That's a very good possibility, and have Shohei Ohtani play the outfield a little bit more. So that's something just to watch for. Luis Severino is going out on a rehab assignment starting next week, so he's a guy to watch for. Chris Sale, he has 2 more rehab starts, and then, as long as everything goes well, he will be activated. Jack Flaherty, he's on a rehab assignment also. He will be back as soon as they get him up to about 70 to 75 pitches. His last rehab start when he went about 30 pitches. And I have to mention this guy, your favorite, Chris Archer. He's currently rehabbing. I think he had thoracic outlet surgery. He's had 4 rehab starts. If he's available, he's only 17% owned in CBS right now. In those 4 starts, 2.79 ERA, .93 WHIP, a 10.2 K per 9, .9 homers per 9. It's only over 9 2/3 innings. I understand that. But that's very un-Chris Archer-like. And if he's available, he's on the Rays. They're going to probably need him at some point. He will come up, and he may play a role later on in the season for the Rays.
Goodness gracious, you can't get me to pick up Chris Archer. Sorry. I'm Chris Archered out.
Well, if you have so many injuries on your team, you may need to.
I'm going to add one waiver pickup, and this is breaking news right now, but I would pick up Alcides Escobar. He might be the starting shortstop for the Washington Nationals. Just got word of a trade. Max Scherzer and Trey Turner going to the Dodgers. So pick up.
It really feels like 2015 now. Alcides Escobar on a starting on a team again. This is ridiculous.
Oh boy. But yeah, he's going to score some runs, steal a couple occasional base. He'll get playing time. I mean, they got to play somebody out there short.
That's true.
Well,
they do have they also called up the prospect Luis Garcia. If he's available, he's one of their top prospects. He's going to come up, and he's a guy that you can pick up also.
All right, yeah, good suggestion there. All right, well, once again, it's been a great episode. We got Bill James. We had deadline closers, waiver wire. So much action-packed stuff in this episode. But it is now time to go. So before that, Ruvain, why don't you just tell us where we can find your work and read your stuff and all things Ruvain Guy.
You can follow me on Twitter at MLB Injury Guru, where I tweet out injury updates on a daily basis, who's next guy up, and how long they should be out based on their injury and based on my medical experience. I also have a weekly article on Rotoballer discussing these injuries that I discussed today, as well as every other injury, almost every other important fantasy-relevant injury, and the next guy up.
All right, and I'm Ariel Cohen. You can follow me on Twitter at ATCNY. Read my stuff over at Fangraph Sportsline and Rotoballer. And, of course, you can listen to me right here on the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs each week. All right, we've got 2 months left in the season. Time to kick it into high gear in your fantasy baseball leagues. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you next time. Take care, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. Follow us on Twitter at beat_shift_pod.